What's going on, traders, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's your boy here, the Forex Amateur, and welcome back to another Monday morning weekly outlook. Right, as you know, on the weekly outlook videos, I simply like to go through my outlook of the market for this week. What is my expectations and forecasts? How am I going to react to the market based on what happens? And what is my plan basically going forward? I don't know why I always go into so much, using so much words to say something so simple, but yeah. So before I get into it, let me throw in my little disclaimer. Remember, I am not licensed nor qualified to offer financial investment or trading advice. Everything I speak about on these videos is my own opinion. I do not recommend live trading. So if you do go into trading live funds, ensure you do it with cash that you are willing to lose, because the truth is you could lose your entire investment and it is risky out here. Now let's get straight into it. As you know, the format of the weekly video, we basically start with the dollar index, break down my outlook of the dollar index, move on into whatever currencies or whatever else I'm focusing on in that spectrum, and then we move over to the synthetic indices market. So starting off with the dollar index, as you know, last week I did say that we would have a strong bullish week, and as you can see with last week's candle, we had a huge range on last week's candle. If I were to just measure that range up, that was, what is that? Oh, this is what am I saying? This is a dollar index. Yeah. So this is like 20 points, 20 points, 200 points. I don't know how you calculate that, but anyway, it should be about 200 odd pips, right? That move from there to the upside. So that was a pretty strong move to the upside. I'm still pretty much bullish on this market. However, I am expecting perhaps for the market to pull back and correct some of that big range that was created by last week move. So as we go into the daily chart on the dollar index, I'm already going into it with the expectation that, okay, this expansion has extended quite far to the upside. So I should expect this market to do maybe a pullback or even a reversal, whatever it wants to do. But I should expect at minimum for this market to come back if it wants to go up or go down, right? So either which way, this range here from here to here now becomes a selling range, right? So what I'm looking at here right now is I've basically highlighted this as a sensitive key zone, and I'm not expecting to see this market go above this area. Even if it goes above here, we should see candle closes within this zone, and even if we get our wicks to the upside, that's completely fine. But overall, looking at this area here as an area where we'll see that downside and see this market come back to test some of these zones in here before it makes up its decision as to whether it wants to go up or go down. But remember, the purpose of this is to simply try to project what is going to happen this week, right? So I'm not going to project too far into the future. So looking at the 4-hour chart, what I've basically identified here is this as a structure level on the 4-hour chart that broke structure to the upside, coming into this key zone of the daily chart. Now, on here, should I see enough price action confirmation perhaps on a lower time frame, then I will take a sell targeting this level as my first target, as I will expect it to maybe reverse from somewhere around here, pull back up, and then push to the downside again, right? But if I do not see that, then what I will be looking at is very simply a break of structure to the downside here. And should I get that, that is then when I will be looking for those pullbacks into the range for me to capitalize on those sells back to the downside from that area. So overall, looking at the dollar index, I am expecting to see a bit of maybe a early pullback for the early part of this week, and maybe we might continue with that bullish push come the later part of the week. But obviously we just have to see how price does react off of that zone. Overall, however, I am still expecting a pullback, but overall we're still bullish on this range. So should this market come back into around these areas in here, then we'll simply be looking for more moves to the upside from around there. So this area from here to here now becomes a nice range that you can use as a selling range. So moving on from that, let's move on to Euro USD on the weekly chart. We did speak about this as a key area. We'll see a huge bearish push off that. And as you can see, we've gotten that last week's candle was 300 pips. 300 pips, not bad, not bad for 1 week, right? Especially considering the fact that you could have been in and out and working those ranges continuously and find that you make 1,000 pips over that 300 pips, right? So looking at here, what I am looking at is we are still bearish on this market. Looking at this week's candle, the fact that we've opened up and we're already trading bullish, I will expect to see this candle sort of fill up some of this range, perhaps come into this range, and then expect it to continue back to the downside again. Overall, our targets is still that weekly level over there. So knowing that we now go down to the lower time frame, knowing that we are bearish, we have identified a break of structures here, a lot of break of structures to the downside with this huge bearish push. So we should expect some sort of a pullback into around these areas and then a continuation. What I'm expecting is something into around this blue zone, and then I'll continue looking for sells to the downside. What we might, however, get is we might get into the blue zone down to here, maybe a break above there, and then get this market coming back down into here. So that's something that's very likely to see happening. So looking at that, we drop down to the 4-hour chart. On here as well, I've identified my pivot points, which is this yellow line in here. And if price does tap into this level, I'll be looking to go long into around this zone. If it does not, however, and it comes into this area, then I'll be looking to go short with targets at this area and obviously the lower areas that I've just spoken about on the daily chart. Right, so that's very straightforward, nothing too complex, especially with the consistency of the videos coming out on a weekly basis. You are able to sort of follow the story, and there isn't really much need for me to go back and sort of explain my thought process and all of those things. So that's I suppose that's the benefit of doing the weekly video. So let's move over to the synthetic indices market, and let's talk about volatility 100. And we are on the weekly chart now. On volatility 100, you do know that I have been speaking about it for a while now, that I am long-term bearish on this market, expecting this market to come back down into this area in here, perhaps even lower. But for now, I just want to project for this area in here, and then we will analyze and move forward from there. So looking at that, we know about this break of structure. We've spoken about it over the past couple of weeks. We've spoken about the fact that we are looking for downside on here. We do see that last week's candle was a bit indecisive in that it pulled up to the upside and then it pulled back down, and now it's closed in sort of a very small range. So what we should expect is for this market to either come down and want to drive back up before it comes and finishes to the downside, or for this candle to sort of not really break below this wick here and just push to the upside slightly and then sort of drop from there. But overall, I am looking for downside on this market. So looking at the daily chart, we've basically now have our bias for the week, knowing we're looking for downside. We've got break of structure to the downside in here. We've got price pulling back into the range, and we've got it now reattempting to break. However, what I am expecting right now is I'm more likely expecting the market to like react here and then perhaps come back into this range, simply because of this big wick that it left to the upside here. So it might want to come and fill up some of that wick before it breaks to the downside. As you can see here, I've highlighted this as my TP line. So this is where I'm expecting sales to come into this basically this horizontal line that I've got in there, and then I'll be looking for whatever happens thereafter, right? So moving on to the 4-hour chart, not really much we can speak about here. And on the 4-hour chart, I did identify the fact that this was the high that broke the structure to the downside. We see a false breakout here, a huge bearish push to the downside here. So if price does break this low, then we should expect it to reach here and sort of reach lower. But it does seem to be reacting pretty strongly at the moment. But I wouldn't really consider this to be something to look for upside. I would still be looking for some downside from here, simply for the fact that we've got this false breakout here, and I will expect it to continue. Now, this is the last quarter of this. Actually, we're about to enter the last quarter of this candle, or the last quarter of this candle. So we should expect to see the actual direction in which this candle wants to move, and it might most likely want to close to the downside. Moving on to volatility 75, we are on the weekly chart, and we're talking about the fact that we have been looking at this range as a bullish range because of this break in market structure. You can see price reacted pretty strongly there. However, we can see when it got to the upside here, as I said, at minimum, we'd be looking for price to come back into that old high. Now, my mentorship students do know how I work with my targeting, so we would be out of this market way before it even starts rejecting at this point, right? So that's something that we use in terms of targeting and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily talk about that on the channel. Now, looking at this, what am I expecting? I'm expecting to see downside on volatility 75 for this week, right? Moving on to the daily chart, we can see a very strong bearish push after this market came to the upside here with a false breakout above this previous high. We can see it's breaking to the downside. However, confirmation would come in the form of a break below this previous low in here. So right now, it does seem to want to sort of pull back and fill in some of the structure in here before it continues to the downside. So overall, looking at volatility 75 on the daily chart, we would expect it to come back into around this zones and then look for that downside from there, targeting obviously the low firstly, and then this low, and then obviously this level here. So I have sort of 1, 2, 3 targets that I would be looking at. Moving on, I don't necessarily think, oh, I do have something on the 4-hour chart. Okay, so on the 4-hour chart, I've got this little zone that I've drawn in here, and that's simply based off the fact that price is failing to break this previous low that it created here. So I will expect to see a break of market structure to the upside. This zone specifically is my level that I would call, for lack of a better term, I would call it a level of support, right? Just because I don't necessarily want to disclose the thought process behind this, but I will not expect to see price come back below this zone here, no matter what happens until this high has been taken and price has sort of come to the upside, maybe even into the upper part of this range. I will not expect to see price trade below this zone, right? So this is sort of my support, right? I will be looking to see how this candle closes. Once this candle closes, automatically this qualifies once it closes above here, and this is a valid zone that I'll be looking to take trades off to the upside, targeting this specific level right in there. So that's about that on volatility 75. Let's move on to volatility 10, and we're on the weekly chart. As you know, on volatility 10, we did speak about huge downside on volatility 10. Looking at last week and that huge rejection of the downside in here, what I am now expecting on this market is I'm expecting boom, 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 and another pop to the upside again. Even if it doesn't come above this high, if it comes right back into this high, but that is what I'm currently expecting at the moment. So looking at volatility 10, I would expect to see it sort of push back up into around this high and then look for maybe a pullback into here, and that will take us long for the long term, right? So overall, now I'm looking at a upside for this week on volatility 10. So looking at this daily chart, we do have a very strong break to the downside here, right? Which means that I was basically looking at this as a valid area where price will not break above again. So this would I would call a validation point, right? So looking at this now, what I am looking at is I am expecting to see this this is a supply zone sort of drive price back down into around this area here, right? It might not drive it all the way to my target, but it might drive it back into this area here and then give us a reaction back up again before it comes down into here, right? So that is more or less what I am looking at. So looking at this very simply, that is what I would be looking at. So if price does come back into this area here, then I will be very aggressive in my approach in taking sells here, because I am very confident in this, especially since it's coupled with a structure break of a significant shorter intermediate term low, as well as a longer term swing low, because this is a swing point here up to there, right? So looking at that, that is what I am looking at on here. So more or less downside for the next couple of days on volatility 10. And we're looking at the 4-hour chart right now, and I have been expecting this to come back into below this low so that I could look for a buy. So that is more or less what I will be expecting to see on volatility 10. Once it comes into this area, as I said, I do not expect to see it breaking, so I will then be looking for continuation sells back down into that daily pivot point that I did highlight, which is this yellow line basically, right? So that's it from my side. Not really much more that I do need to speak about. Ensure that if you do have any questions, anything else that you want us to have a look at, perhaps it's not clear, perhaps there's something else that I can speak about in more detail, perhaps. If I can, I will do so and I will put that out. Remember, I've already started dropping the videos for the course. The first video is already up, which is the back testing video. That's a very important video, and that's the reason why I chose to speak about that topic first. So be sure to go check it out if you have not. And based on how the views and stuff pick up on there, I will choose how often I sort of post those videos as part of that course. I'm not just going to dump the entire course on there, because I feel like people won't treat it with the same level of urgency and stuff like that in terms of managing the workload and all of that. So I'm going to do it at a slow, bite-sized pace, so you are able to digest the information as it comes as well. I'm also going to try and make the videos as comprehensive as possible without revealing too much that I don't necessarily want to disclose on the channel specifically, right? So I do hope that this video has been educational, and until next time, it has been a pleasure as always to share with you guys, and I am wishing you a blessed and a profitable trading week.